Hello everybody, good evening and welcome to another one of my evening vlogs. I'm doing a little bit earlier today because I've got a friend coming round. Now the last few days I've been talking about moral and psychological issues which I find come up in my life, in my relationships with other people, and this brought to mind something that happened a few months ago. Back in the autumn, I went to a talk which a friend of mine gave. Now this chap is a Roman Catholic, and I'm not. That's just kind of the precursor to what he was saying. Now, it said some very interesting things, and but one of the Roman Catholic things that he said that I had extreme difficulty with was this notion that if somebody does you harm and you don't forgive them, then you're going to go to hell. Well, this is kind of crumbs. How do you start to begin to unravel that? It's such a heavy kind of statement, you know. You start out with the thought, oh hey look, somebody's done me wrong and I'm going to go to hell for it. That's not kind of very fair, is it? But I'd kind of like to deconstruct this a little bit, because obviously I didn't, when I heard him say that, I thought, crumbs, this is a bit like good old-fashioned dark Catholicism, you know, like permanent excommunication, which is kind of like the reason why I think Catholicism is fundamentally wrong, this notion of excommunication, the idea that some person can get in between you and the Divine Spirit, I find completely unacceptable. Anyway, I'll get back to that another time. My friend talking about people going to hell, well, it's kind of like, I'm not going to put the word hell in the title of this video because people have such strong reactions to that word, and kind of, I suppose I don't blame them. So much has been put on it and so much has been put down people's throats about it that I think it needs some serious deconstruction. There's kind of two angles on it. Obviously there's the original kind of, you know, Gehenna place, which was like this rubbish tip on the outskirts of Jerusalem where they used to burn all the rubbish. So the idea of going to hell is like you'll be kind of burnt up and consumed and you won't exist any longer. Goodbye. But also I think that kind of more importantly for this kind of notion of hell is the medieval the medieval concretization of myth, and wonderful as Dante's Divine Comedy is, nonetheless I think that perhaps it's misunderstood as being a literal representation of hell, and I think that we have to kind of get away from this notion. Perhaps it was okay for the Piscean age, but we need to get away from this notion of external God and you know, bad human punishment. There are moral issues and I'm really concerned about them, but I think a notion like that isn't helpful. So what does it all mean? And I think I touched on it a day or two ago, that this kind of feeds into an Eckhart Tolle kind of thing, and perhaps a little bit of kind of Buddhist notion that hell is a state of mind where people put themselves. I have a photocopy on the bed beside my wall of a diagram of the various cosmic planes and planes of consciousness, from a book from the White Eagle Lodge, which some people may have heard of. And at the very most bottom level, it has, I think it's the dense lower astral, where people are trapped in the material plane by fierce lusts, desires, and things that they're not willing to be able to let go of and move on from. I mean, these things are all necessary and in their place that we experience these things in the material plane. Incarnation, that's kind of what it's about. But the thing is, I would suggest, as the White Eagle Lodge would be saying, is that these are things that we experience and learn by and move on from. So we learn how to use them, the consequences of them, that kind of thing. So if that is like what we're talking about when we talk about hell being a state of mind, being trapped in that state of mind where you can't let go of bad things that you're still going around in your head. I had a very kind of sad opening to being aware of this in some ways when I was nursing, and about 20 years ago or something, and I spent some time working on a ward for the elderly, but it was elderly psychiatric care, and there were a large number of people there with degenerative neurological conditions, Alzheimer type stuff. But one of the things that struck me was that how some of these people were kind of trapped in aspects of their personality which had kind of ossified, and they would be kind of ruminating and going round in their minds and repeating things that had happened many years before, perhaps in their childhood, or they would be repeating some anger or some resentment, and even kind of without putting it in kind of context of neurology that I was the other day, it's very easy to see how these are kind of practiced loops in the personality. Bob Dylan's recycling the same old thoughts until these thoughts, the neural circuits, become kind of autonomous. Medieval people would have sort of said, "Oh, that person's got a demon." In a still functioning person, it's kind of like what a neurosis is, I guess. But when you see that this has become all that the person is, and that the light in their eyes, their soul, whatever it is, their consciousness, their awareness of possibility, to use the term that Sheldrake does about consciousness, it's very sad, and you kind of wonder where that consciousness has gone. But this informs that notion of what that chap was saying about people who don't forgive going to hell, is that I realised that this is what it is, ending up in those closed neural circuits that don't want to step out into possibility, so you get away from kind of punitive notions of external gods and stuff like that, and then you can kind of step forward into a kind of Eckhart Tolle kind of now. It's kind of where I'm kind of going with this, which is that if consciousness is something which can't be, which shouldn't be fixed into these neural loops, then the way for it to get out is to choose. That's a possibility thing, choice of possibility, awareness of possibility. Choose to let go of that neural loop, that obsession, that neurosis, and like a well-worn rut, we will find ourselves going back to it. It happens. You don't break mental habits of a lifetime with one thought. But of course, persistence is the answer to this, because if you're trying to build up some new neural pathways, then they are going to need repetition, like learning a scale on an instrument, or developing any new skill, any new movement. It's just an internal movement. And this letting go, this is forgiveness. Now, this is what I was trying to get at the other day, is that while forgiveness has its aspects with regard to other people, actually the most important aspect of it is what it does to us, because it allows us to become somebody who flows and grows. Where you put your attention, where you focus your attention, that is the part of your life that will grow. That is the intentional part of your life. That is where you focus your attention. So if you think about the optical metaphor, a focus of a lens is somewhere. If you focus your eye's lens on something, that like a telescope, the thing that you focus on becomes bigger. People have probably had the experience of listening to music and then listening to it again and listening to it many times and still seeing more in that, or reading a book, but music's probably the most obvious. And this is because we flesh out and elaborate our understanding, our experience of that, because it is something which we need to if we are to assimilate it, we need to build the neural structures into which it can fit. So at first we only get a broad view of it, because we're only able to fit it into a general context of experience of music, which we may or may not have heard of similar types. And then the more we focus the attention, the more we focus our energy, the more we enlarge this thing in our attention, the more we elaborate the neural pathways. And the richer the thing that we're focusing on, then the more elaborate the pathways can become. So that's why it is just so important to not get trapped in these, as the White Eagle Lodge calls them, fierce lusts and obsessions, because that's what these neural loops are. And it is so easy to inadvertently reinforce these things so that they become the whole experience of reality, and it's just really, really sad and painful, and it's really hard to know what anybody can do to help someone there, because it's kind of what they're choosing, and they can often resent any different interpretation of reality other than the unforgiving one of that obsession, which kind of leads towards the person with dementia just repeating the same old angers and resentments. So I suppose understanding how much these things actually hurt ourselves, it's probably been one of the biggest stimuli to me, realising how much I've hurt myself by resenting or being angry or hanging on to hatreds or dislikes of people. And that was something I went through big time about 5 years ago, and in the end, as Alanis Morris says, you've got to wear it down. You've got to wear it down, and then when you've just worn yourself down so much, you've worn down the problem so much, you've worn down the issue so much, you just realise that however justified that feeling was, however much you've been hurt or abused or mistreated by people, and these things are just completely real. It's happened to me, believe me. But just hanging on to that is the thing that actually is that thing I talked about at the beginning, the sending yourself to hell. It's not some external God doing it. It's oneself choosing to stay in that prison, and it's difficult to get out of. But I think that if you can see how much you're hurting yourself, observe that, then I think that's for me at least, it was the kind of thing that made me realise I had to find some better thing which went forward, and if you're going to live in the now, then you have to let go of these things. Inform the background by all means, but not control the steering wheel. Definitely not. So be in the now, folks. Don't let the past control you. Don't project angers and unforgiveness from the past onto the future or onto the now, because it's trapping you in a rigid shell which needs to be let go of. So, well, serious stuff today, folks. But if we're to make a better world, then we have to be better people, and we have to let go of the old world and go forward without carrying too much baggage. Okay, well, I'll leave it there for now, folks. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you again soon in Lakesh. Oh, hello everybody, good evening, and welcome to another one of my evening vlogs. I'm doing a little bit earlier today because I've got a friend coming round. Now, the last few days I've been talking about kind of moral and psychological issues which if somebody does you harm and you don't forgive them, then you're going to go to hell. Well, this is kind of crumbs. How do you start to begin to unravel that? It's such a heavy kind of statement, you know. You start out with the thought, oh, hey, look, somebody's done me wrong, and I'm going to go to hell for it. That's not come up in my life, in my relationships with other people. And this brought to mind something that happened a few months ago. Back in the autumn, I went to a talk which a friend of mine gave, That's not kind of very fair, is it? But I'd kind of like to deconstruct this a little bit, because obviously I didn't. When I heard him say that, I thought, crumbs, this is a bit like good old-fashioned dark Catholicism, you know, like permanent excommunication, which is kind of like the reason why I think Catholicism. Now, this chap is a Roman Catholic, and I'm not. That's just kind of the precursor to what he was saying. Now, it said some very interesting things, and but one of the Roman Catholic things that he said that I had extreme difficulty with was this notion that